Eleanor's offer was generous. Enough to start over in Paris, pay off every debt, and never look back. Grace tore the check in half in front of her. That was the moment the real war began. The rain had been falling since morning, the kind of slow, indifferent rain that doesn't bother to be dramatic. It just arrives and stays, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and wet. Grace sat cross-legged on the floor of their apartment, surrounded by fabric swatches and sketch pads and 3 empty coffee cups, and she was smiling. She was always smiling when she worked. Evan had noticed that in the very first week of knowing her. The way her mouth would curve slightly at the corner when she found the right combination of texture and color, like she was sharing a private joke with the cloth itself. He was leaning against the doorframe watching her now, jacket still on, keys in his hand, and he had been standing there for at least 2 minutes without saying anything because sometimes that was the only thing he wanted, to watch Grace be Grace. She looked up and caught him. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to know you've chosen the burgundy," he said. She looked down at the swatch in her hand, surprised, then laughed. "The burgundy won 5 minutes ago. You're behind." He crossed the room and stepped carefully over a roll of Italian linen and sat down beside her on the floor, which was not easy in a suit, but he did it anyway, because sitting beside her on the floor was always worth the wrinkled trousers. She leaned into him automatically, the way people lean into walls they trust completely. "How was the meeting?" she asked. There was a pause, just a half second, but Grace had spent 2 years learning the precise language of Evan's silences, and this one had weight to it. "Evan." He set his keys down on the floor very carefully, as if the sound might matter. "It wasn't great." She set down the swatch. "Tell me." He told her. It took a while, because the problem was the kind that unravels slowly, the kind where you keep thinking you've found the bottom, and then the floor drops again. The legal error had happened 18 months ago, buried in the paperwork of a supplier contract his first lawyer had drawn up in a rush. The clause had looked standard. It wasn't. And now the supplier was pursuing damages that would, if the court sided with them, exceed everything Evan had built in 4 years of working 18-hour days. The apartment was leased. The studio space was leased. The business accounts were stretched thin from last quarter's expansion. There was almost nothing to cushion the fall. Grace listened to all of it without interrupting, which was one of the things he loved most about her. She never interrupted when the information was still coming. She waited until he had said everything, until the last number and the last worst-case scenario had been laid out between them like pieces of a very bad puzzle. And then she said, "Okay, what are our options?" "Not his options. Ours." He looked at her. "There's one. But you're not going to like it." She raised an eyebrow. "Tell me the one I'm not going to like." Evan's mother, Eleanora Whitfield, lived 40 minutes outside the city in a house that called itself a manor the way some people call themselves aristocrats, loudly and with total conviction. It had 12 bedrooms, a library that had never actually been used for reading, a garden maintained by 2 full-time staff, and a dining room table long enough to seat 20 people in perfect discomfort. Eleanora had offered, through the family attorney, to cover Evan's debts entirely. The condition was simple. Evan and Grace would move into the manor for 1 year. In exchange, Eleanora would retire the debt and ask for nothing further in writing. "She's asked for nothing in writing," Grace said slowly. "No, that's the part that worries me." "That's the part that worries me too," Evan admitted. Grace was quiet for a long moment. She picked up the burgundy swatch again and turned it over in her fingers, not looking at it, just needing something to hold. Outside, the rain continued its patient, gray work. 1 year, she said. 1 year. And she covers everything. Everything. Grace looked up at him. There was something complicated moving behind her eyes. Not fear exactly. More like the expression of someone calculating the distance of a jump they've already decided to take. "Your mother doesn't like me, Evan. My mother doesn't like anyone who doesn't come pre-approved by a family committee. She really doesn't like me. She doesn't know you. She's had 2 years. He took her hand. She has opinions based on nothing. You have never given her a single real reason to dislike you, and you know it." He paused. 1 year, Grace. We get through 1 year, and we come out the other side with a clean slate. We rebuild. Properly this time, with better lawyers. She looked down at their hands. His thumb moved over her knuckles in small, slow circles. "You'd owe her a year of your life," she said quietly. He corrected. "We'd owe her a year. Together. And that's the part she's underestimated. Grace exhaled slowly. Then she smiled, just slightly, in the way she sometimes did when she'd reached a decision she wasn't entirely happy about, but had accepted completely. Fine, she said, but I'm bringing all my fabric. Obviously. And if she touches my sketchbooks, I'll personally build you a locked studio. In a manor with 12 bedrooms. The supply closet. Very exclusive. She laughed, and for a moment the rain outside didn't matter, and the debt didn't matter, and the 12-bedroom house with its long, cold dining table didn't matter. Just the laugh. Just the floor and the fabric swatches and the 3 empty coffee cups, and the 2 of them deciding, as they always decided, together. They moved in on a Tuesday, which Grace would later say should have been the first warning sign, because nothing good ever starts on a Tuesday. The drive out was pleasant enough. Evan's old Volvo packed to the roof with her design samples and his boxes of files. The radio playing something neither of them was really listening to. The city giving way to motorway, giving way to the kind of countryside that looks like it was specifically designed to make you feel small and grateful at once. Grace had her feet on the dashboard and a thermos of coffee balanced on her knee, and she was looking out the window, cataloging colors the way she always did. The gray-green of the fields, the dirty white of the fence posts, the specific shade of October sky that she had once tried to replicate in silk and nearly gotten right. Eleonora was waiting on the front steps when they pulled up. She was a tall woman, spare and precise in the way of people who have decided that emotion is largely decorative. Her hair was silver and worn up, and she had on a camel coat that probably cost more than their monthly rent. She watched the car pull up with an expression that Grace would later describe to her best friend Mara as a diplomat being handed a gift she already knows is the wrong size. Evan. She kissed him on the cheek. It was technically warm. Mom. He stepped back. You remember Grace. Eleonora turned. The smile she produced was impeccable, symmetrical, well-timed, absolutely hollow. Of course. Welcome, Grace. I hope you'll be comfortable here. Thank you for having us, Grace said, and her voice was steady and pleasant and gave away nothing at all, which Evan noticed and appreciated enormously. They were given the East Wing guest suite, which was beautiful in the way of rooms that have been decorated by professionals and lived in by no one. Everything was the right color and the right texture and entirely without personality. Grace put a stack of her sketchbooks on the writing desk the first evening, and immediately the room looked more like somewhere a person might actually inhabit. Evan watched her do it and felt something in his chest loosen slightly. Better, he asked. 60% better, she said. Needs more mess. We can work on that. The first week was almost manageable. Eleonora was scrupulously polite, which was its own kind of cold, the politeness of someone who has decided not to fight in the open. She gave them space during the days and expected them at dinner, which was served at 7:30 precisely and eaten in the long dining room under the chandelier that Grace thought was hideous and didn't say so. The dinners were the first battleground, though it took Grace a while to recognize them as such. They began simply enough, small gatherings of 3 or 4, then larger ones, gradually, almost imperceptibly expanding. Eleonora had what she called a circle, which was a collection of people from old money and new politics, and the particular overlap between the two where the real decisions got made. Solicitors and senators, and the CEOs of companies whose names you'd recognize. Women who wore their wealth like a second skin. Men who laughed at everything and meant none of it. Grace, who had grown up in a semi-detached in Leeds with a mother who taught primary school and a father who repaired appliances, found herself at the table looking at these people and feeling like someone had quietly swapped her script for one in a foreign language. She didn't panic. That was important. She didn't go quiet in the visible, obvious way that Eleonora was perhaps hoping for. She was simply, quietly, slightly out of place, and she dealt with it by listening more than she spoke, by asking questions when she had them, by being genuinely curious about people even when they weren't particularly interesting, because Grace had always believed you could find something worth knowing in almost anyone if you were willing to look for it. But she felt it. The way the room moved around Eleonora's gravity, the way conversations shifted when she entered them, the way certain people glanced at Grace and then at Eleonora and seemed to be waiting for a cue about how to proceed. She felt the edges of it like a draft through an old window, the understanding that she was here on sufferance, that her presence was tolerated rather than welcomed, that she was not part of the world these people occupied, and that Eleonora had no intention of helping her enter it. Under the table, at every single one of those dinners, Evan found her hand. He didn't make a production of it. He didn't look at her and nod meaningfully or squeeze her fingers dramatically or do anything that could be read by the table as a statement. He just reached across under the white linen tablecloth and found her hand and held it, steady and warm, through the soup course and the main and the conversation about constituency boundaries or the emerging markets or whatever it was that evening. And what it said, very quietly and very clearly, was, "I know. I see you. We're here together, and this is just theater, and none of it is real, and I've got you." She pressed her thumb against his knuckles back. Message received. The second week was when Eleonora started the real work. Grace had an assistant, a freelance designer named Priya who worked remotely but handled Grace's client communications and sample coordination, an essential part of keeping the design consultancy running while Grace was stuck an hour from the city. Priya emailed on a Wednesday morning to say, apologetically, that she had been approached by another firm and was taking a full-time position, effective immediately, and she was so sorry for the short notice. Grace sat with that email for a moment. Then she called Priya. "This isn't about the other firm," Grace said, not unkindly. "Someone got to you." Priya was silent for just a moment too long. "I really am sorry, Grace. The timing is terrible." "It's fine," Grace said. "I'll manage. Take care of yourself." She hung up and sat looking at her laptop, working through the logistics in her head. The situation was annoying but not catastrophic. She'd been doing this long enough to handle her own communications. She'd just need to restructure her workday. She pulled up her calendar and started rearranging. The laptop stopped working 4 days later. Not dramatically, it didn't crash or burn. It simply, one morning, refused to recognize her design software. The program had run perfectly fine the evening before. She'd saved everything to the cloud, thank God, so nothing was lost, but the machine itself became unreliable and then unresponsive in ways that the Manor's IT person, a quiet young man named Tom, who came on Thursdays, couldn't fully explain. He thought something had been done to the system drivers, but he wasn't certain, and his uncertainty was very precise in the way of someone who has been told to be uncertain. Grace borrowed a laptop from the Manor's library, an older model that ran slowly and had a keyboard with a slightly sticky E, and she kept working. She started going to the library every morning. Not the estate library, a proper public library, 15 minutes away in the village, which had decent Wi-Fi and the specific quality of silence that comes from a building where no one is watching you. She worked there for 4 or 5 hours every morning, on the sticky laptop with her notebooks open beside her and a tea from the cafe next door, and she got things done. Not as efficiently as she would have at home, not as comfortably, but she got them done because Grace Sutton had been doing things the hard way since she was 19 years old, and she was not about to stop now. Evan found out about the library on a Thursday. He'd gone looking for her mid-morning and found the east wing empty and the borrowed laptop open on her desk, and a note that said, "Library. Back by 1. There's coffee left." He stood there reading the note, and then he looked at the laptop. Old, borrowed, slow, and his jaw tightened in a way that happened sometimes when he was very angry and very controlled about it at the same time. He didn't say anything to his mother. Not yet. He was picking his battles. But that evening, when Grace was telling him about a client email she'd managed to sort out on the sticky laptop with its particular letter problem, he reached across the kitchen table and covered her hand with his and looked at her with an expression she didn't see often, something close to reverence, maybe, or the specific emotion that comes when you love someone and they keep showing you, over and over, exactly who they are. "You know you don't have to be this okay," he said. "I know," she said. "But I am so." "The library," he said. "Is it good?" "It's very good. They have a very serious reference section and a children's corner with a mural of a dragon that I think is genuinely excellent." He looked at her for a long moment. "I love you," he said, the way people say things they mean all the way down. "I know," she said again and smiled. "I love you too. Now eat your dinner." Eleonora escalated in the third week. She was too careful to do it clumsily. She never raised her voice, never made direct accusations, never did anything that could be pointed to and labeled hostile. She was far more skilled than that. She operated through suggestion, through implication, through the strategic deployment of concern. And her primary weapon was Evan. She found him alone on a Sunday morning in the garden. Evan liked to walk when he was thinking, and the manor's grounds gave him room to do it. Eleonora fell into step beside him with the unhurried confidence of a woman who has never needed to chase anything. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine, Mom." "You've looked tired for weeks." She paused, and her timing was impeccable, the pause of a skilled speaker who knows exactly how long to let silence work. "She doesn't belong here, Evan. I don't say that to be unkind. I say it because I watch her every day, and I can see that she's unhappy. She's struggling. She's working from a library because she won't ask for help." Evan kept walking. His hands were in his jacket pockets. "She's not struggling," he said. "She's adapting. There's a difference." "Is there?" "She's lost her assistant. Her equipment isn't working properly. She's far from her clients, far from everything that supports her work." "Interesting that those things keep happening," Evan said, his voice very even. Eleonora didn't acknowledge that. She was too practiced. "My point is only this. If you truly love her, and I believe you do, in your way, then perhaps the kindest thing you can do is let her go back to her life. She didn't cause your debts. Why should she serve your sentence?" They walked in silence for a moment. The garden in October was mostly bare, the rose bushes pruned back hard, the beds turned over, the trees stripped down to their honest architecture. "She's not serving anything," Evan said. "She's here because she chose to be. She chose it because she loves you. That doesn't make it right. You're very interested in what's right for Grace all of a sudden." Eleonora stopped walking. Evan walked 2 more steps, and then stopped too, turned to face her. She looked at him with the expression she'd always used when she thought he was being naive, a kind of patient, sorrowful certainty. "I'm interested in what's right for you," she said. "I always have been. And I'm telling you that this relationship is going to cost you more than any debt." Evan looked at his mother for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but the edges of it were very clear. "I think you should be careful, Mom, about how certain you are of things you don't understand." He walked back to the house. That night, he told Grace about the conversation in full, lying on the guest bed with the ceiling above them and the old house making its old house sounds around them. He didn't try to soften it. He told her what his mother had said, word for word, because lying to Grace by omission was something he was constitutionally incapable of. She had always been able to tell, within approximately 4 minutes, when he was leaving something out, and he'd stopped trying years ago. Grace was quiet when he finished. Then she said, "She's not wrong that it's hard. That's not what she's doing. No, but she's using a true thing to do a dishonest thing, which is more sophisticated than just lying." A pause. "Does it work? When she says things like that to you, does it make me want to send you away?" "Yes." "No," he said simply. "It makes me want to hold on to you harder," which is probably not the response she's looking for. Grace turned her head to look at him. "You know, I was thinking today, in the library, while I was dealing with the sticky E, that this is genuinely absurd. We're living in a 12-bedroom manor, and I'm borrowing a laptop, and your mother is slowly trying to dismantle our relationship one polite suggestion at a time, and we're what? 9 weeks from the halfway point. 14 weeks from the halfway point. 14. Okay." She looked back at the ceiling. "I'm not leaving. I know. I want to be clear about it." "You are. You're very clear." He found her hand in the dark. "We're not leaving. Neither of us. Not like this." "Not like this," she agreed. They stayed awake for another 2 hours, talking, not about strategy or plans or what to do next, but about everything else, the way you do when you've decided to hold your ground, and there's nothing more to decide, just each other and the time until morning. He told her about his father, who had died when Evan was 23, a man she'd never met, but felt she knew through years of Evan's stories. A quiet, principled man who had built the family business from almost nothing and spent his life being quietly overruled by his wife. Grace told him about her grandmother, who had taught her to sew on a machine older than the television, who had told her that the only fabric worth working with was the kind that had some resistance to it, because anything that gives too easily doesn't hold its shape. "That's very clearly a metaphor," Evan said. "She was a very metaphorical woman. Your grandmother would have been terrifying to my mother. My grandmother would have had your mother at the library in a week." He laughed, and it was a real laugh, the nighttime kind, not for anyone else. She curled closer to him, and eventually they slept, and the old house settled around them. and outside the October sky was very dark and very full of stars that the manor's lights were too bright to show. The direct assault came on a Friday morning in November. Grace was in the East Wing workroom. She'd commandeered it by simple persistence, spending enough consecutive hours there that it had become, by the logic of occupancy, her space. When Eleonora knocked and entered simultaneously, which was a technique she had perfected over decades. The knock was gesture. The entry was fact. She was dressed with her usual precision, and she carried herself with the calm of someone who has already decided how the conversation ends. She sat down, uninvited, in the chair beside the window. Grace put down her pencil and waited. Eleonora placed a checkbook on the table between them. She did not open it. She simply put it there, the way you put a weapon on a table when you want someone to know you have it. "I'd like to make you an offer," Eleonora said. "One that I think, if you consider it honestly, you'll recognize as generous." "All right," Grace said. "I will write you a check today for whatever figure you need to establish your design practice independently. A studio, equipment, an assistant, 2 assistants, whatever the operational costs are for the first 2 years. A pause. In Paris, if you'd like. Somewhere with a fashion industry that would actually appreciate what you do." Grace looked at the checkbook. It was leather-bound and old, the kind of thing that has been refilled many times. "In exchange for leaving," Grace said. "In exchange for being honest with yourself about where you belong." Eleonora's voice was not unkind. It was, in its way, almost gentle, which made it more frightening than anger would have been. "You are talented, Grace. I don't say that to flatter you. I've seen your work, and you have a real gift. You deserve to be somewhere that recognizes it. Not here, managing around obstacles that shouldn't exist, working from a borrowed machine in a village library." "Who did you get to Priya?" Grace said. Eleonora's expression didn't change. "I beg your pardon." "My assistant, Priya. She left very suddenly and was very apologetic about it." "Who contacted her? Or was it the laptop you wanted to ask about? Because I'm also curious about that." A beat of silence. Eleonora picked up the checkbook and opened it. She uncapped a pen. "Name a number, Grace." Grace stood up. She picked up the checkbook. Eleonora looked up at her with an expression of perfect composure. Grace tore the check, along with the 2 pages behind it, cleanly in half. And then in half again. She set the pieces on the table. "I don't want your money," she said. Her voice was very steady, and she was proud of that steadiness in the moment and for a long time afterward. "I don't want your studio, and I don't want Paris, and I don't want to be somewhere that you've decided I belong. I'm exactly where I decided to be." She sat back down. She picked up her pencil. "The door was open when you came in," she said. "You can leave it open." Eleonora sat very still for a moment. Then she stood, smoothed her jacket, and left. The door, Grace noted, she closed behind her. Grace sat for a while with her pencil in her hand, not drawing. Her heart was moving faster than she would have liked. Then she took a breath, opened her sketchbook to a fresh page, and went back to work. When she told Evan that evening, she told it plainly, without drama, the way she told most things. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and listened, and when she got to the part about tearing the check, something happened in his face. A flash of something fierce and warm, gone quickly but leaving its mark, the way lightning leaves an impression on the eye after it's gone. "She sat there," he said. "Yes." "And then left." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you all right?" "I'm annoyed," Grace said honestly, which is different from not being all right. "I'm annoyed that she thinks I have a price. I'm annoyed that she made it so easy. Paris, a studio, 2 assistants, obviously calibrated for what she thinks would be most tempting." She paused. "Did she tell you?" "Not yet." He looked at his hands. "She will. She'll tell me you turned down a generous offer, and she's worried about your state of mind or something." "Probably." He looked up at her. "I'm sorry, Grace. I'm sorry that she's doing this and that you're having to." "Don't," she said gently. "Don't apologize for her. She's not your fault. She's my mother. That's not the same as being your fault." He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. Outside, the November evening was dark and early, and the kitchen was warm, and for a moment neither of them said anything, just the sound of the old house around them and their hands on the table. 14 weeks, Grace said. 13 and a half, Evan corrected. She almost smiled. "We're going to be fine." "Yes," he said. "We are." But the situation changed before the 13 weeks were up. It changed on a cold Monday in late November, and the change came from a direction neither of them had anticipated. Evan got the call from his attorney in the afternoon. He took it in the estate garden, walking in circles the way he did when the information was complicated, which it was. He stood there in the November cold for 40 minutes, and then he came inside, and he found Grace in the workroom, and he stood in the doorway for a moment with an expression she had never seen on him before, a particular combination of calm and something underneath the calm that was not calm at all. "She bought the debt," he said. Grace turned around slowly. "What?" "The supplier debt. She found out she could buy it from the supplier, offer them a cash settlement, take over as the creditor. She did it this morning. Apparently, she's been moving toward it for weeks." He paused. "She's now the person I owe. Personally. Every cent of it." Grace held very still. She could hear what was coming. "And she's made it clear," Evans said, his voice very controlled, "that she will pursue it through the courts. Personally. With the specific intent of making it as public and as damaging as possible, including raising the question of whether certain decisions I made in the early days of the business were, legally speaking, structured in ways that could be characterized as." He stopped. Started again. "She used the word fraud, Grace. She said it very carefully, clearly having considered the legal weight of it." The room was very quiet. Through the window, the estate grounds were gray and bare, and the sky was the color of old pewter. "She'll destroy you," Grace said quietly. "Not a question. She'll try. Whether she succeeds depends on a lot of factors." He crossed his arms, not defensively, more like he was holding himself together by the simple mechanics of the gesture. "The question is whether she means it as a threat or as a promise." "With Eleonora?" "I know." He uncrossed his arms. "I know." Grace looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the man she had chosen. This particular human being, with his quiet stubbornness and his 6 words when 3 will do approach to emotional honesty and his habit of finding her hand under tables when the world was loudest. She looked at him standing in the doorway of the room she'd claimed by persistence, in the house they'd moved into to save their future, and she thought about choices. About the architecture of them. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay." She stood up. "Tell me everything. From the beginning. Every detail you know." He told her. It took the rest of the afternoon and most of the evening. They sat in the workroom with the heating on and the door closed, and Grace took notes in her sketchbook. Not designs, just words, a chronology, a map of the situation, and she asked questions in the precise, methodical way she had when she was solving a problem she was taking seriously. When he was done, she sat looking at her notes. "Can she actually make the fraud case stick?" she asked. "My attorney doesn't think so. He thinks it's a threat designed to paralyze. But fighting it would be expensive and public and ugly. Very ugly." Grace tapped her pencil against the sketchbook. Then she looked up. "The estate. Who originally set it up?" "My father, mostly. He built the business. She's always claimed equal ownership, but I never." He stopped. "Why? Did your father leave any documentation? Personal correspondence, financial records, original trust documents? Things that existed before the current arrangement?" Evan's expression shifted. Something moved in it. Not certainty, not yet, but the early shape of one. He kept everything. He was obsessive about it. Records, letters, account statements going back 20 years. There are boxes of his papers in the estate library. I've never gone through them properly. "We should go through them," Grace said. They started that night. In the library. The actual library this time. The estate one with its 12-foot shelves and its unused first editions and its smell of old paper and something faintly like cedar. Eleonora's library, which was also, technically, Evan's library, because it was the family home and he was family, whatever his mother might prefer. They pulled boxes from the lower shelves and spread the contents across the reading table under the good lamp, and they read. It was slow work. His father's handwriting was small and careful, and the documents were in the loose chronological order of someone who filed things faithfully but never quite got around to the indexing. There were letters going back decades, to solicitors, to business partners, to accountants. There were bank statements and correspondence and the original articles of the family trust, annotated in the margins in his father's hand. Grace was the one who found it. It was nearly midnight, and she had been cross-referencing 2 letters from 1987 with a trust amendment from 1991, and she read a particular section 4 times before she said anything because she wanted to be certain. "Evan." He looked up from the box he was in. Come here. He came around the table, and she showed him the documents. She walked him through them carefully. The original trust structure, the amendment, a letter from his father's solicitor that clarified the intent in plain terms. She watched him read, and watched his face change as he understood. The structure of the original trust, established by his father before Eleonora had any formal involvement in the business, contained a provision. The provision stated, in straightforward legal language, that a portion of the trust's assets, a specific, named portion, assigned before the marriage, before the expansion, before any of the complexity that had accumulated over decades, was designated as the personal inheritance of any direct descendant of the trust's founder. The founder being his father, the direct descendant being Evan. His mother was a beneficiary. She was not the sole authority. And critically, the asset in question was enough. Not a fortune, not a restoration of everything, but enough. Enough to retire the debt, enough to establish them independently, enough to begin again without the scaffolding of Eleonora's money or her conditions. The documents made clear that Evan had the legal standing to claim this inheritance and that no other party to the trust had the right to block it. She knew about this, Evan said. His voice was very quiet. She'd have to. She knew about it, and she's been structuring things for years to make sure I never. He stopped. He put both hands flat on the table. He looked at the documents. She's been keeping me dependent on purpose. Grace didn't say anything. She waited. He stood there for a long time. Then he straightened up and he looked at Grace. Her with her pencil and her sketchbook-turned legal notepad, and her ink-stained fingers, and her reading glasses she only wore when no one else was around and hadn't thought to take off because it was midnight and they were in the library, and she'd been too focused to remember. And his expression in that moment was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Not dramatic, not performed, just completely, terribly clear. I'm going to need a solicitor tomorrow, he said. I already texted Mara, Grace said. Her cousin is a trust attorney. She's sending me the number in the morning. He blinked. You texted Mara while we were multitasking. I knew where this was going. She took off her glasses and folded them. Are you all right? He was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't know yet. I will be. Yes, she said. You will. They spent another hour in the library, organizing the documents, making copies on the ancient photocopier in the corner that groaned and flashed, and eventually cooperated. Grace made a numbered list in her sketchbook of every relevant document with a brief description, because she was systematic even at midnight, which was one of the things about her that Evan found quietly extraordinary. They turned off the library light at 1 in the morning and walked back through the sleeping house. And in the corridor, she took his hand, and he held it, and neither of them said anything. Just the two of them walking through the dark of Eleonora's manor with a folder full of documents that were about to change everything. Eleonora called Evan to her study the next morning at 9 o'clock. It was a summons, politely worded, but a summons nonetheless. He came. She was at her desk when he arrived, and she had papers in front of her. Her papers, her solicitor's papers, the formal documentation of the debt she now held, and the options she was presenting. She had arranged 2 chairs on the far side of the desk, which struck Evan, in a small, cold way, as the most revealing thing she'd done yet. 2 chairs, because she'd been expecting Grace. Grace was not there. She was waiting in the East Wing, which they had agreed, because Evan needed to do this part alone. This was his mother and his family and his years of complicated history with both, and Grace had understood that without needing it explained. Eleonora looked up when he entered, then at the chair beside him. I expected. It's just me, Evan said. He sat down. She sat down. Between them, the papers on the desk. I've given this a great deal of thought, Eleonora began, and she had her reasonable voice on, the one he'd heard all his life when she'd already decided something and was now explaining it to him, as if they were still in negotiation. The situation is difficult for everyone. I don't want to pursue legal action. I want you to know that. That's a last resort. But I need you to understand that. Mom, Evan said. She stopped. He reached into the folder he'd brought and set several documents on her desk. He placed them carefully, precisely, the way she had always placed things when she wanted them taken seriously. She looked down at them. He watched her face as she recognized them. The trust documents, the amendment, the solicitor's letter. He watched the careful arrangement of her expression do something it very rarely did. Shift. Not dramatically, just a tightening around the eyes. A single second of genuine surprise, quickly managed. These are Father's documents, he said. I've had them reviewed, overnight, which is why I look terrible. Thank you for not mentioning it. They're clear, Mom. Whatever restructuring you've done around the trust over the years, you haven't been able to touch this specific component. You couldn't. It was written in before you had any authority over it. He paused. I'm going to claim it. Legally. Through the proper channels. It'll take a few weeks, and there's some paperwork, but my solicitor is confident. Eleonora sat very still. The amount is sufficient to retire the supplier debt in full, Evan continued. Which means you're no longer my creditor, because there's no debt for you to hold. He looked at her directly. The fraud suggestion. I'd encourage you to reconsider that path. My attorney has reviewed the original transactions, and he's quite certain it wouldn't stick, and the attempt itself would be counterproductive for the family name in ways that I don't think you'd enjoy. A long silence. Outside the study windows, the November estate was gray and still. You're very sure of yourself this morning, Eleonora said. Her voice was even. She was not someone who crumbled. He had not expected her to. I am, he said. She found those documents. He didn't deny it. She's very good at research. Eleonora looked down at the papers on her desk. Something moved across her face that Evan couldn't quite read. Not defeat exactly, and not anger. Something more complicated and older than either. He wondered, for a moment that surprised him, if she was thinking about his father. About the man who had written those documents, who had thought carefully enough about the future to put that provision in, who had perhaps known, in some way, how things would go. I also brought this, Evan said. He set another document on the desk. It's a formal withdrawal from the family business. All positions, all shareholding. Clean. I've had it drawn up this week. He stood up. I don't want a war with you, Mom. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because I'm choosing Grace, and I need you to understand that that's not a negotiating position. It's not something you can buy or frighten or talk me out of. I chose her a long time ago, and everything since then has only made me more certain. So I'm taking my inheritance, and I'm clearing my debts, and I'm going. And I'd like it very much if someday, somehow, we found our way to something better than this. But that's up to you. He picked up the folder. He looked at her, his mother, in her camel jacket, at her desk, with the gray estate outside her windows and the papers he'd laid before her, and the silence of everything she hadn't said and might never say. Goodbye, Mom, he said. The room's been lovely. He closed the study door behind him very gently on the way out. Grace was sitting on the bed in the east wing with her knees pulled up and her sketchbook open, not drawing, just holding the pencil, when she heard his footsteps in the corridor. She could tell from the sound of them. Not hurried, not dragging, just even and deliberate. Something about how it had gone. She was still trying to read the full story from the way he opened the door. He opened it and stood there and looked at her, and he said, "Pack your sketchbooks." She looked at him. How did it go? "Pack your sketchbooks," he said again, and this time there was something in it that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry, but lived somewhere in the territory between the two. In the country of people who have been holding themselves together for a long time and have just set something down. She got up. She went to him. She put her arms around him, and he held her very hard for a long moment. Both of them standing in the east wing doorway with the borrowed laptop on the desk behind them and the sketchbooks stacked on the writing table in the room that had never quite been theirs. It went, he said into her hair, exactly how it needed to. Did she? She knows the documents are valid. She won't fight it. Not this. There's nothing to fight with. And the business withdrawal? On her desk. Grace pulled back enough to look at his face. He looked tired, genuinely, bone-deeply tired in the way of someone who has spent months maintaining a particular kind of alertness, and also, underneath the tiredness, something she hadn't seen in a while. Something lighter. Like a window that's been closed all winter and has finally been opened, just a crack, enough to feel that the air outside is different from the air inside. Are you okay? She asked. I think so. I will be. He looked around the room. I don't want to spend another night here. Then let's not. They packed in an hour and a half. It should have taken longer, but they didn't have as much as they might have thought. Most of what filled the East Wing was Grace's work materials, and she was systematic about packing those, nested and organized in the same fabric sample boxes she'd brought them in. Evan packed his boxes of files. They stripped the bed and folded the linen out of simple habit and left it on the chair, and Grace took her sketchbooks from the writing desk and put them last into the bag she carried by hand, the specific bag she used when she was afraid something might get lost. They loaded the Volvo in 2 trips. It was colder than it had been in weeks, the kind of cold that comes with a specific clarity, the air sharp and dry and very honest about itself. The estate driveway was empty. They saw no one on the way out. No Eleonora, no staff, no witnesses. Just the gravel under the tires and the gate at the end of it and the road beyond. Evan drove. Grace had her feet on the dashboard the same way she had on the way in. The thermos gone this time, but the same set of her shoulders, the same attention to the passing landscape. She watched the estate recede in the wing mirror and then looked forward. "Where are we going?" she asked. Mara said her sister's flat is empty until January. She offered. Mara's sister has a flat in the city? Apparently. 2 bedrooms. She's in Copenhagen until Christmas. Mara's sister is in Copenhagen, Grace repeated, processing this. In her Copenhagen flat. Yes. Grace looked at him. Did you plan this? I may have mentioned the situation to Mara about 2 weeks ago. Evan. In case we needed a backup. She shook her head slowly, but she was smiling. The real one, the full one, the one that started in her eyes before it reached her mouth. You told Mara 2 weeks ago. I told Mara 2 weeks ago. So Mara has known for 2 weeks. She's been very patient about not saying anything to you. I'm going to have a word with Mara. She'll be very apologetic and completely unrepentant. Grace laughed, and the sound of it filled the car, and Evan felt it in his chest the way you feel good news before you understand why. Some cellular-level recognition of things being, against considerable odds, all right. They drove. The motorway gave way to the city outskirts, and the city outskirts gave way to the city itself, which was lit and loud and entirely indifferent to their situation in the specific way of cities, which have seen everything and are impressed by none of it. They found the street, they found the building, they found the flat, 2nd floor, slightly narrow staircase, key under the mat because Mara had called ahead. Inside was small and warm, and someone else's personality was all over it in the specific texture of lived-in spaces. Potted plants on the windowsill, a bookshelf that was actually books, a kitchen with mismatched mugs, and a spice rack that had been used. It was everything the east wing of the Whitfield Manor had not been. It was the kind of room where people actually lived. They set the boxes and bags in the entrance hall and stood in the kitchen and looked at each other. I'll get food, Evan said. There's a place around the corner Mara mentioned. She said it's the kind that stays open late and doesn't judge you. That's exactly the kind we need, Grace said. He went out. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, and then she started making tea on the stranger's hob with a stranger's kettle, and she looked out the stranger's window at the city street below, and she felt something happen in her chest. A slow, quiet release, like the specific exhale of someone who has been holding their breath so long they'd stopped noticing it. She took out her sketchbook. Not the legal notes one, the real one. The one she'd had since May, half filled with textile work and the occasional terrible drawing of a building she'd passed and liked. She opened it to a fresh page, and she picked up her pencil, and she didn't draw anything specific, just lines for now, just the beginning of something, the way all things begin, as the idea of their own shape. Evan came back with 2 pizza boxes and a brown paper bag that clinked slightly and turned out to contain a bottle of wine that was not expensive and was perfectly right. They didn't have a table yet, or rather, they had a table, but it was currently inaccessible under boxes. So they put the pizza boxes on the kitchen floor and sat down beside them, Grace with her back against the lower cabinet and Evan beside her, and they ate pizza on the floor of someone else's kitchen in the city that was, for now, theirs. It was good pizza. The wine was the kind that doesn't need to be good wine to do its job. The kitchen was warm and slightly cluttered and very human. So, Evan said, pulling a second slice from the box. Big picture. Big picture, Grace agreed. We have the inheritance claim in process. 6 to 8 weeks according to the solicitor. Right. We have this flat until January. Which gives us time to find something. Which gives us time to find something, he agreed. My withdrawal from the family business closes out some obligations, but opens up my time, which means I can actually focus on building something new. With the right legal structure this time. Different lawyers, Grace said. Emphatically different lawyers. And I need to replace Priya. She thought. Actually, I have 2 people in mind. Both better for where I want to take the consultancy. Where do you want to take it? She looked at the sketchbook open on the floor beside her. The fresh page. The beginning of lines. Bigger, she said. I've been operating small because it felt safer and because I was afraid of, she paused. I don't know. Overextending. Wanting too much. She looked at him. I don't think I'm afraid of that anymore. He looked at her with the particular attention he gave things that mattered. What changed? She thought about the library with the sticky laptop. About tearing the check into quarters and putting the pieces on the table. About midnight in the estate library, going through his father's papers, finding the thing that changed everything. About the fact that through all of it, the single constant had been the hand under the table, the footsteps in the corridor, the someone who told her the truth and held her hard and packed the Volvo in an hour and a half. I had good company, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the pizza box and tucked her hair back from her face, gently, the way he'd done 100 times, and he looked at her with everything she'd ever needed to see, right there, plain as anything. We're going to be fine, he said. Not as a question, not even quite as reassurance, just as information, as fact. We are, she said. We're going to be completely fine. Outside, the city did what cities do. Cars and lights and the sound of other people's lives continuing, indifferent and beautiful and entirely unaware of the two people on the kitchen floor with their pizza and their plans and their very ordinary, extraordinary decision to stay. The sketchbook lay open on the floor beside them, and the lines on the fresh page were still just the beginning of something, still finding their shape, still becoming whatever they were going to be, which was exactly the right place to be.